Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Dr. Kaivalya T. Desai, and the module which we are going to discuss today is land reforms in India under the subject rural development. There are three major objectives of this module. First, to understand the importance of land reforms in India. Second, to develop insights about the objectives and features of land reforms in India. Third, to understand the reasons for incomplete implementation of land reforms in India. Some key themes, issues that we'll discuss throughout this module are land reforms, agrarian relations, intermediaries, tenancy, land ceiling, and consolidation of landhold. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, was always critical of the agrarian relations between two predominant social classes, namely the landlords and the peasants. He emphasized that Swaraj would be of little avail if it did not solve the problems of the Kisans. Thus, under his leadership as the first Prime Minister of independent India, land reforms were introduced in India. Also, the land reforms got priority in the constitution, which begins with a preamble that is based on the four cornerstones of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity, and further strengthened by certain specific provisions, particularly the directive principles of state policy. Why land reforms are so significant? We need to highlight that. See, it is not just that the first Prime Minister's idea of doing away with the unequal and hierarchical relationship between the two predominant social classes, which is the landlords and the peasants, but land reforms hold a key to actually development and growth, overall development and growth. Now, how? Why land reforms are so important? See, the land reforms basically can lead to two important developments. One is that it would lead to more security to the landless peasants. With them getting access to land, owning land, it would definitely mean more economic and social security for them. In addition to this, what it will do is that it will also, if land reforms would have been implemented properly, they might have also led to, destruction of this oppressive relationship between the zamindars and the kisans. But for the country's economic overall growth and development as well, land reforms are very significant because they would have possibly resulted in an increase in agricultural production. Now, it's important to understand this whole cycle. See, basically with land reforms, when the landless peasants get security of tenure, they are bound to invest on their land. They would increase the agricultural productivity. Now, the moment it's very simple, that the moment you have ownership over something, you tend to care for it more. And if you have ownership of land, then you like to produce more. You like that asset to yield more to yourself. And if you have security of tenure on that land, then definitely there is a huge potential of increasing this overall production. Now, the moment there is an increase in agricultural production, and remember that we are talking about the post-independent time, when the majority of India's population lived in the villages with agriculture as the major occupation. Now, with increase in agricultural productivity owing to land reforms would lead to increase in agricultural surplus in the hands of the farmers. Now, what it does is, this agricultural surplus which is produced creates an internal demand for industrial goods. Thus, land reforms have have also the potential to lead towards industrialization through internal demand rather than external demand. So, this would have further led to the growth and development of the country vis-a-vis industrialization as well. Now, that's the huge significance of land reforms. They were envisioned by Pandit Nehru, but unfortunately, lack of proper implementation uh, led to because of lack of proper implementation, uh, one could not reap the benefits, not only the landless peasants and small landowners, but also overall the country's economic growth. The benefits for that could also not be reaped. Yet, it is important to discuss uh, the land reforms that were introduced and discuss the features of the four categories of land reforms, and post that we will discuss why they were not implemented, what were the difficulties in implementing the land reforms. Thus there are the land reforms are include four major categories, namely abolition of intermediaries, tenancy regulation, ceiling on land holdings, and consolidation of disparate land holdings. The actual implementation of these legislations and their impact on the agrarian structure is, however, a different story. Uh, Most of these legislations did have loopholes that allowed the landlords to tamper with the land records, evicting their tenants and using other means to escape the legislations. Now let us discuss the different categories of land reforms. Abolition of intermediaries. Intermediaries like zamindars, talukdars, jagirdars and inams had dominated the agricultural sector in India by the time country attained independence. Quite naturally, top priority was accorded to the abolition of intermediary tenures. Soon after the independence, measures for the abolition of the zamindari system were adopted in different states. The first act to abolish intermediaries was passed in Madras in 1948. Since then, state after state passed legislation abolishing zamindari rights. By 1955, the progress for the abolition of intermediaries had been completed in almost all the states. The second category of land reforms is tenancy regulation. Rural India witnesses three types of tenants. First, permanent or occupancy tenants. Second, temporary or non-occupancy tenants. And third, subtenants. The permanent tenants have the permanent ownership right over the land. The rent for the permanent tenants is fixed. The right to cultivate land goes from generation to generation so long as they pay rent. Because of such security of holding, the occupancy tenants make improvement on their land. The temporary or the non-occupancy tenants have no rights to cultivate the land permanently. They can be evicted from land on minor pretexts. In their case, rent is too high, it may be increased arbitrarily. They do not make any improvement on the land for the fear of eviction. Subtenants are the tenants who cultivate the land of the big landowners. They cultivate land only on lease basis. The leases are rather oral. These can be changed at will. They pay rent either in cash or in share of the product. In any case, the rent is exorbitant. There is no security of tenure. Thus, the tenancy reforms in various states had three important features, though the provisions are not similar in all cases. These are security of tenure for the tenants, fixation of fair rent, and grant of ownership rights to certain types of tenants. The third category of land reforms is ceiling on land holdings. Ceiling on land holdings implies the fixing of the maximum amount of land that an individual or family can possess. Land ceiling has two aspects. One, the fixation of ceiling limit, and the two, the acquisition of surplus land and its distribution among the small farmers and landless workers. Economic rationality of land ceiling is that Small farms provide more employment opportunities. They require less capital compared to the large farms. On the other hand, the social rationality of land sealing is that in a poor country like India, the supply of land is limited and number of claimants is large. Hence, it is socially unjust to allow small number of people to hold large part of land. Such condition is against the justice, equality and prosperity of the majority of the people. It is socially justifiable to impose ceilings on land and distribute it to the actual users of land, making the tenants as the owners. Thus, ceiling on land holdings uh, can lead to you know a decrease uh, in social inequality, as well as can lead to improvement in production. The last category of land reforms is consolidation of disparate land holdings. Consolidation of holdings means bringing together the various small plots of land of a farmer scattered all over the village as one compact block, either through purchase or exchange of land with others. Due to inheritance laws, the average size of land holdings in India is very small. The inevitable consequence of inheritance laws is that farms are being subdivided and fragmented with every passing generation. Subdivision and fragmentation of holdings results in several disadvantages such as wastage of land, difficulties in land management, difficulty in the adoption of new technology, disputes over boundaries, disguise of unemployment, low productivity, etc. Thus, consolidation of land holdings might result in a lot of advantages such as curbing endless subdivision of land holdings, saving time and labor of the farmer, promoting large-scale cultivation, bringing down cost of cultivation, and improvement in land quality through bunding, fencing, etc. We discussed how land reform, we discussed the importance, we highlighted the different features of the four categories of land reforms and how it could lead to increase in productivity as well can lead to social equality. But the story of land reforms in India, especially the implementation of land reforms, is not so positive. There have been many claim that land reforms failed in most states of India. Rather, some claim also say that where it succeeded, actually today, the equality, whether it's economic, social, or political, is higher. What have been the various causes for failure of these land reforms, or why did the land reforms fail in India? It's important to understand that so that one can, one can understand why underdevelopment or lower levels of development have taken place in rural India. The first major cause is undue advance publicity and delay in enacting land laws. Much publicity was given in advance by the leaders of the ruling party to the proposed land reforms after independence. This was largely done by them to take the political gains, and that too strictly in the sense of votes, I would say. So they publicized it in advance a lot. Then, on top of that, a lot of time was taken for a bill to become an act in many states of India. This enabled the landowners to make necessary adjustment so as to be able to evade various provisions of land reform legislation. So it basically, political parties gave it too much of advance publicity, and that they'll bring about land reforms and etc. And also the procedures within the various legislatures, whether the Lok Sabha or the various state legislatures, it took so much of time for any bill on land reform to become an act that landowners figured out, how to evade most of these legislations. It gave them a lot of time to do that. Then, loose definition of the term personal cultivation. One could resume land for personal cultivation under the definition even while sitting at a distance of 200 miles. So the zamindars were permitted to possess substantial areas of land for cultivation even when they were actually not cultivating them. Again, the laws have provided for many exemptions in the form of land awarded for gallantry, land under orchards, tea estates, well-run farms, etc. So the zamindars were actually able to use, these exemptions to actually, still retain large tracts of land. Then optional nature of the laws. Most of the laws granting ownership rights to tenants were not mandatory. They were rather optional. The tenants had to have to move the government for grant of ownership rights. They will not get them. They didn't get them automatically. So on many occasions, tenants hesitated to approach the courts for this purpose merely out of fear of the landlords. See, one needs to understand that uh, the landless peasants were an extremely oppressed class, and zamindars and the landowners, landlords, they were a very powerful class. They exercised a lot of control and over the landless peasants. So for them, the whole process of taking the legal path, and especially due to the optional nature of the laws, was so difficult, and that and they feared the landlord so much that they could not actually take the advantage of land reforms. Then there was malafide transfer of land. It was highly prevalent. To escape the laws relating to land sealings, the zamindars indulged in large-scale transfer of land to their family members or kinsmen, and such transactions do not make any change in the operational aspect of agriculture. So basically, the land, on paper shifts from the zamindar to probably his kinsmen or to family members, and it actually does not go to the tiller. It actually does not go to the agricultural laborer who's landless. So what happens is that the operational aspect of agriculture does not change, whether in the form of whether we talk about the relations between the agrarian relations, or even the structure. Then lack of social consciousness among the tenant. The importance of social consciousness of the tenants is an important factor uh, responsible for successful implementation of land reforms. The small cultivators and the landless were not only unorganized, but in most cases ignorant of legal and constitutional process. And not much awareness was done. Yes, publicity was done by different political parties uh, for their gains, but actual awareness about land reforms, the intricacies of land reforms, you know, was not done. And already the lack of social consciousness among the tenants was so low due to oppression that successful implementation of land reforms could not take place. And this such awareness and empowerment was important if we wanted the land reforms to succeed. Then, in many cases, it was witnessed that the state sided with the big farmers. The state governments, which controlled the land operations, moved favorably towards the big farmers. The interests of the small farmers were, because of this, were vitally affected. So each state, because of the federal structure, each state had passed their own legislations. They were just broad guidelines on land reform, but the legislations differed from state to state, and it was claimed that state usually sided with the big farmers, and a reason for this was also that post independence, you know when the big landowners, they could corner a lot of advantages of you know things such as green revolution, etc. They became a very powerful political lobby. So to have them on their side, you know, the state governments many a times sided with the interests of the big farmers only. Then there was lack of strong political will. The program of land reforms necessitates adequate political desire, zeal, and support, because it's looking at a major structural change in agriculture. But unfortunately, the political leaders uh, only wore a mask of progressive socialistic outlook. The lack of political will is amply demonstrated by the large gaps between policy and legislation, and more specifically between the law and its implementation. Bureaucratic corruption was another major reason. Land reforms provided a golden opportunity to the bureaucracy, especially at the lower levels, such as the patwaris and other functionaries of the revenue department, to make money. Again, in many cases, the highly placed officials themselves were landlords. So it represents a conflict of interest for themselves. Now, the land reforms are to are go against go in favor of the landless tenants, and are actually going against the landlords, big landlords. But if the big landlords themselves are the bureaucrats, it creates a conflict there, and therefore ineffective implementation is bound to happen. Then surplus land is fallow and uncultivable land. Wherever there was surplus land available for redistribution to the landless or the small landowners, uh, it was found to be fallow and uncultivable land. So the holders of surplus land manipulated the land data in such a way that the land in excess in their possession was usually barren and uncultivable. Such surplus land, did not yield any benefit to the landless peasants. Then again, absence of records. Absence of records regarding ownership and possession of land and about its actual cultivator stands in the way of properly identifying the beneficiaries of land reforms. So to actually prove it on paper for landless peasants, it's very difficult to prove it on paper. Okay, they've been cultivating this land for so many years. So there were no official records on paper to prove their ownership, which again became a hurdle towards implementation of land reforms. Then lack of uniformity in land reform laws. Now, land reform laws are not uniform throughout India. They are different in different states. I highlighted this point earlier also, that there were broad guidelines, but each state enacted their own legislations. This also accounted for the slow progress of land reform measures. Then, ironically, even emergence of new agricultural technology also created that gap between the large farmers and the landless farmers and the small farmers. The new seed cum fertilizer technology, for its successful adoption, needed ample resources and dynamic entrepreneurship, and only large farmers could fulfill those conditions. In a nutshell, land reforms were a noble, land reforms were a very positive step taken uh, by the Indian government, envisioned by our first Prime Minister, but they were not successfully implemented across different states in India. Thus, they largely failed to, uh, influence the agrarian relations in a positive direction, or to improve productivity, or to, they could not bring about a major change in the agrarian structure of India. So, finally, let me just recapitulate all the points that we've been discussing. that is, let me just summarize all these points in the concluding discussion. Firstly, the introduction and implementation of land reforms in India had the twinfold objective of increasing agricultural productivity on the one hand and changing exploitative agrarian relations in rural India on the other. In order to meet these objectives, four features were developed under land reforms, namely abolition of intermediaries, tenancy regulation, land ceiling, and consolidation of disparate land holdings. Land reforms were the key to address questions of land related to rent, ejectment, and possession so that the rural masses of India, which is the Kisans or the peasantry, could be economically and socially empowered. Consequently, it was expected that it will generate agricultural surplus in the hands of the peasantry. This in turn would create a solid foundation for industrialization in India by generating internal demand for industrial goods by the rural masses. However, due to a variety of social, economic, and political reasons, land reforms could not be implemented properly in India, which has led to continued economic and social inequality in the country. Thank you.